Hello and welcome to the lecture for week 7, module 5. There are two very important concepts that need to be parsed out in this particular week. And so we're going to walk through that very quickly. The two concepts that you need to know frontwards, backwards, in and out are reliability and validity. If I were describing reliability in a nutshell, it would be using this word right here, consistency. If you give a test, does it yield similar, reproducible, replicable results under similar circumstances with similar folks? This is something that you'll see often. You'll see measures of consistency or reliability in statistical measurements. If you're assessing somebody with depression, you oftentimes will want to see if you get consistent results with your 40 question or PHQ-9 or whatever your instrument is. You'll want to actually compare your instrument, the results from that, to see if they correlate with what professionals might say that are giving a professional interview, that are trying to diagnose somebody using their own clinical skills and clinical questions. So oftentimes when you see an instrument being normed or being argued for in a peer-reviewed article, okay, we're trying to show that this is actually a good instrument to use to measure depression. So they'll have 50 clinical experts also look at the same people that they use to take their questionnaire. And so blindly, the professionals will either offer a diagnosis or not, and the questionnaire will as well. If you see a high degree of reliability between the professionals and the instrument that you created, then you can make an argument that you actually have created a valid or accurate measure of depression. So you have to have reliability before you can have validity. That's very important. But you can have reliability without having validity. You just can't have validity without reliability. Remember those. Those are good, important concepts. Those might come back again on an exam somewhere. But types of reliability, here are a couple mentioned in our lecture for today. Internal consistency. A lot of times to measure internal consistency, you conduct a Cronbach's alpha, which is a common statistical measure of internal consistency. Oftentimes when people are creating their instruments, when they're publishing them in journals, they'll run this statistic and report its results to hopefully illustrate that there are some internal scales that are consistent with one another. So for example, a personality test might have multiple subscales measuring different aspects of personality. For example, extroversion, neuroticism. Internal consistency would evaluate if the questions with each subscale consistently reflect the intended personality trait. So, for instance, let's say it is a Big Five personality assessment, and there's 5 questions designed to measure extroversion. There's 5 questions designed to measure neuroticism. You would want the results to illustrate, through hundreds of participants, that those have some correlation to each other. If somebody answered, they were an extrovert, and you have, a handful of your large sample is really high in extroversion. You'd want all those questions that deal with extroversion. You would want them to also have a high reliability within each other, meaning they're correlated to each other. If somebody's high on one question, they should be high on another question rated, to extroversion. Now that's, if you had somebody low in introversion, again, you would want that set of maybe 5 questions that were measuring extroversion to be consistent among themselves for each person's personality. So anyway, internal consistency is a good way to illustrate construct validity. Okay, that's a different type of validity, but we'll talk about that. But it's a way of showing that your test is accurate. Another way is test-retest reliability. If you give it to a group of, so for example, a memory test might be given to a group of students twice with a week in between administrations. Retest reliability would assess if student scores remain relatively stable across the two administrations. Now, maybe you have a few students that went out partying in between then, and so their memory got worse. But, we expect that functions of memory are pretty, should be fairly stable within people. Our neurons should fire in a similar pattern. So you expect to have at least a decent amount of reliability between a first administration to a second administration. If you didn't, you'd have to really explore, well, why not? So that's important. And again, you're looking at larger samples, larger groups of participants, hopefully 200, 300 people that you're able to establish these statistics and these metrics that would support the instrument. Inter-rater reliability, I just mentioned that before with, that was my example between having a group of therapists diagnose people or possibly diagnose people with anxiety versus the state trait anxiety with 40 questions. Let's compare what the therapist came up with what the actual instrument came up with. Are there similarities between low, medium, or high levels of anxiety? Again, you can, and Cohen's kappa is a statistical measure in agreement between raters or possibly even instruments. So you actually can do a lot of times when people are norming these tests, when they're trying to show validity between tests. So let's say I wanted to come out with a new measure of depression, and it's Taylor's depression scale. Well, I would want to probably, one of the gold standards is Beck's depression inventory, the BDI. So I would probably want to give, as I'm norming my test, trying to show that it's valid, I would want to give my participants in my experimental group or, my group of folks where I'm using it. Okay, let's have you take the BDI and also Taylor's depression test and see if those results are consistent. If those have a high, if those have a high measure of reliability between the two of them. And usually if you get up above 0.8 in that regard, you can say that you have a pretty high measure of reliability. I would want to be a 0.9 or above, honestly, in a measure of something that's pretty standardized like depression. But oftentimes, statistically speaking, if you can get that 0.8 threshold, which is about 80% of shared relationship between answers, that's usually a pretty good number to get to show, a high degree or a high level of correlation. And those are, comparing sets of scores. There's a couple of alternate types of reliability I'm not going to go into for time. In fact, you're welcome to read through, the measures of internal consistency. I actually did a split half reliability for my own dissertation because I was checking to see if my data was manipulated by bots. So the split half was I took up until a certain date, I took all of these participant scores and ran some statistics on them. Like I ran the standard deviation. I ran, I tried to look at the distribution. I tried to see if the data were normally distributed, measures of variance, the range. And then I did a date after a certain date where I redeployed to make sure that my data wasn't somehow infiltrated by bots or, because it was an online survey. And luckily I had a high degree of reliability between, before the certain date and after a certain date when I re-released it. So you can do a lot of things to show validity of your own research. So that was interesting for me. Cronbach's alpha, again, you're looking for internal consistency and I would say internal constructs, oftentimes looking, across items. So something you might have 7 items that measure, I don't know, maybe a tendency toward self-blame or something like that. And those 7 items, you'd want them to be consistent. Retest reliability is fairly straightforward. I'm going to, again, here's that 0.8 number above. that I mentioned before. Test, retest reliability. You're welcome to go through and read through that. That's fairly straightforward. For inter-rater reliability, I'd remember the statistical method. Again, take some time to dig into this. I'm going really quickly here because I don't want to overwhelm you all with information. And here it comes out with validity equaling accuracy. That's really a hallmark description of validity, and that's really what we're after when we're, I would say of the two constructs are very important, but at the end of the day, if you don't have validity, you don't have anything with your assessment. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to go on too long, but I look forward to reading your responses to the discussion board this week. And if, as always, please reach out. Your comments are very helpful. Again, there are little bugs along the way with this, and I apologize for that, and I appreciate your patience. But yeah, I'm hopeful that this has been beneficial so far and continues to be. I'll see you soon.